Well, I'd like to roll tape, so I have to tell you I'm recording because that's how we roll.
Yeah, yeah, not like my other friend. That's fine. It's life. That's what happens in Washington.
Hey, I'm not in the loop on all that big politics stuff, sir, but gosh, I appreciate the call, and we so appreciate your generous donation for our community
Well,
through the Annapolis Rising concert over the weekend. Tell us about how that came to be, sir, if you would.
Brian, I got close to Brian Karam when I was, for that very short period of time, the communications director. And one of the things I was really trying to do there is to see if we could break the impasse between the White House correspondents and the press shop. And so, we developed a relationship. And then, obviously, after the tragedy went down, I voiced my concern that the flags weren't being moved to half staff, and I think it was just super important that we recognize the tragedy, and not only on the human scale, which is obviously so devastating to these families, but also in the symbolic scale as it relates to America's journalists and how important it is that we do everything we can to maintain the institution of the free press and the commitment to the First Amendment. So, for me, obviously, my heart goes out to these people, and when Brian called me and asked me if I would consider making a donation, I said absolutely. My wife and I are very proud to do it.
Can we ask how much the donation was, or is that pretty tacky?
Well, I don't know if he would want me to answer that.
Okay.
So, but I mean,
Okay, well, I'm not going to ask that then.
It was a pretty good percentage of what they raised, thank God. So that makes me feel good.
Well, I've been told that they're hoping to provide $100,000. They haven't tallied up the actual numbers yet, but I don't know if you got that report.
I'm pretty sure they got to that number.
It's amazing, isn't it?
Yep.
As far as journalism and the
Right.
importance of communication, do you want to say anything else about how important that is? And do you really feel like this is an attack on the press, or is this an attack from a deranged man who allegedly had an ongoing feud with one man from the newspaper that started in 2011?
Well, here's the conflation that goes on in our society. If I was a police detective and you're reading the reports and the facts of the case, you would assume that it was a deranged man making an attack on someone where there was personal animus. But what happens in our society right now, because we are so sensitized to what's going on related to the press, and by the way, there's culpability in the sense that sometimes people write stories that are unfair, or they may write stories that are factually incorrect. I've had situations like that happen to me. But in general, the incident became a symbol for an attack on the institution of the free press. And so, for me, I think it's just very important that people that understand the Constitution and understand how sacred the free press is to our society have to speak out and have to defend it. And I tell people it's not just being able to criticize our leadership. What the free press does for our young people is something that is so positive for the society, because we teach our children that they're allowed to express themselves and they're allowed to contradict and criticize their leadership. In places like China or Russia, where it's forbidden, you notice that their innovation rates, their creativity rates, and the things that go on in their societies are not as bold and are not as fresh or not as technologically advanced. And so it's not just being able to criticize political leaders, but the free press is symbolic to creativity. And if you think about our society, we've been an unbelievable beneficiary of that, and it's related a great deal to our economic success.
Do you agree with those who would say that the messaging that comes from leadership nationwide is not a positive one for those who work to, improve transparency, maybe just hold officials accountable? They're elected. They're public servants.
Well, listen, I've said consistently, I've said it to the president personally, I don't mind saying it on your airways, and I don't mind saying it on other people's airways, that we have to dial back the hostility. We can't have a war declaration coming from the White House when Steve Bannon said that the press was the enemy and they were the opposition party, and then there was a wartime declaration made. That's just the wrong thing to do. It's actually very hurtful to the president, because what ends up happening is the press is forced then to galvanize against him, and it would be so much easier to just have some level of rational discourse. Certainly, there'll be people in the press that disagree with you. Certainly, you'll have your adversaries in the press. Every president, frankly, has had that, and you can take it right back to George Washington. And so for me, I just think it's very important to hold that sacred. And the other thing I would say is, if you really understand Washington, and although I was only there for a short stay, I did get a PhD on venom, and I got a PhD on understanding the tactics that go on in Washington. And what you find is that when people have power, they have a tendency to get a little crazy with the power. It's like what Lord Acton said, that the power corrupts, but absolute power corrupts absolutely. And so one of the things that our founders wanted was a free and fair press to hold people in power accountable. And so even our elected officials, whoever they may be, the president down to the dog catcher, has to be willing and have a thick skin to subject themselves to that. I understand the president wants to fight back because he feels that the biases have been way overboard. The Harvard study says it's 91% negative. But having said that, I do think that there's a better path where we can dial back the hostility, and I think that would send a good message to everybody as it relates to our leadership.
How can journalists be activists in securing that bridge as far as communication, because it is so important?
Well, I mean, listen, I had that conversation with the president of the White House Correspondents Association last year when I was the communications director, and I was in the process of putting things together where I was going to ask each side to give a little in terms of the reconciliation. But what happens is, you have all these independent, free-spirited people, so you're never going to herd every cat in the same direction. But in general, I think journalists would be better served if no matter what their biases individually are, if they could really try to take a moment and see the other side of the story, because maybe it's part of the business model now. The business model has gotten so fragmented that you're in a situation now where these people are, they're playing to their own audience. They're sort of siloed into these concentric circles of echo chambers, if you will. I just think that's very dangerous and very damaging.
I think that, unfortunately, sir, if I have another minute with you, please, that people are listening to agenda news. They're turning to one channel for this hard right view.
Yep.
They're turning to another channel for a different view. And as far as presenting the news without bias, it's almost like, a far-gone fantasy.
Well, because of the fragmentation of the business model, you're getting the news in a screech now, and so what you're doing is you have a certain understanding of what your audience is, and so you want to keep that audience and retain them, and so you're reconfirming those biases. And so what ends up happening is everyone's living in their own little village of ideology, and that can be long-term damaging. I think that's created a lot of polarity and a lot of, frankly, polemics in the society. So, listen, I mean, I'm all for people having opinions, but I don't know if you've seen any of my television appearances or my public interviews. I'm also about listening and really not trying to make the story an ad hominem or personal attack on anybody, but really just a rigorous policy debate on, what the merits are of the policies. And so if we can focus more on what's right and wrong as opposed to what's left and right, it's just going to be better for our future. We know that good policies work. The president's economic policies, the left will obviously disagree with me, but the president's economic policies are leading to growth, prosperity, and lower unemployment numbers in the African American and Hispanic American community. There are issues with economic policies as well. So, I mean, there's issues related to the deficit. There's issues related to the unevenness of the way the wealth is getting created. And so I'm not sitting here as a Pollyanna. Flip side, there's good policies that have emanated from the left side of the aisle as well. I'm the product of a great public school system, and I'm a direct beneficiary of all of that government spending that went into education in the 60s and 70s when I was growing up. So I'm not one of these people that's like adamant one way or another. I'm sort of looking at the thing and trying to pick the best ideas from a banquet of ideas, but also recognizing that there's weaknesses on both sides. I often find when I'm arguing with people, if they're positioned on the left, then no matter what's coming from them from someone that's right-leaning, you end up in a real crossfire, if you will.
May I ask one final question?
Sure.
Did you get a raw deal in Washington, sir?
Did I get a raw deal? No, I got a deal. I mean, at the end of the day, if you enter the political arena, you have to expect anything could happen. And so, what happened, happened. I think that there's been worse deals than the one that I was dealt, frankly. I mean, some of the good news about it is it's a year since I was let go by the White House, and I was able to return back to my business, put my marriage back together, and I'm here talking to you from Israel, so I'm on a great summer trip right now. So life could be worse, right? For me, it is what it is. I tell people, no sense in whining or complaining. Just get back to work, and keep a positive attitude.
Stay in your lane and do your job, huh?
Politics, you got to roll with the punches and get up off the campus and as fast as you can.
And the hits just keep on coming.
Amen.
Hey, Anthony Scaramucci, gosh, what a pleasure it is to speak with you this morning. Thank you so much for your long-distance call. I hope you and your wife have a fabulous time in Israel. Travel plans safely. Godspeed to you, sir.
Thank you very much, and you enjoy the week. God bless.
Jane Schlegel, WNAV News.